Of 1997, I returned home on the last day of school, ready to embrace the long, sun-soaked days of summer that lay ahead. I could almost feel the warm sand beneath my feet, taste the salty breeze, and hear the gentle lapping of waves as I imagined endless afternoons on the beach. But as soon as I walked through the door, my dreams were shattered by a single sentence from my mother: "You're spending the summer at Uncle Jacob's farm." Disappointment washed over me like a cold wave, extinguishing every hope I had for the perfect summer. I had pictured sleeping in until the sun was high, waking up to the sugary indulgence of cereal in front of the TV, and riding my bike through the neighborhood with the wind in my hair. I had planned to lose myself in the pages of my favorite books, savoring every lazy moment with a glass of ice-cold lemonade in hand. But in an instant, all those dreams evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of early mornings, backbreaking work, and the suffocating monotony of rural life. I begged my mom to let me stay home, but her decision was final. Uncle Jacob had fallen on hard times, she explained, and even though he was too proud to ask for help, he desperately needed it. With my dad long gone and no other family to turn to, the responsibility of assisting Uncle Jacob landed squarely on my shoulders. My mom couldn't take time off work, so I had no choice but to accept my fate. It wasn't that I disliked Uncle Jacob. In fact, I felt a deep sense of pity for him. Over the past year, his life had unraveled in ways that left him a shadow of his former self. Aunt Darcy had passed away suddenly the previous summer, and her death had broken him. Once a proud and diligent farmer, Uncle Jacob had let his fields go to ruin, overgrown with weeds and neglect. His health had deteriorated, and the farm was crumbling around him. I knew deep down that my mom was right. Uncle Jacob needed help, and it would be cruel to turn my back on him. But as the days of June dragged on, and I found myself sweating under the relentless sun, I couldn't help but feel a growing resentment. While my friends were off enjoying vacations and lounging by the pool, I was stuck on the farm, my skin burning and my spirits sinking lower with each passing day. Each day felt like a lifetime, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this summer would leave a mark on me that would never fade. The locked door. One stormy afternoon, as the rain poured down in sheets, Uncle Jacob granted me a rare respite from the exhausting work. He retreated to his room, citing the weather as aggravating his arthritis, though I suspected the true reason was that tomorrow would have been Aunt Darcy's birthday. Alone in the house, with nothing to occupy my time, I wandered through the empty rooms, my thoughts turning to the one place I had been forbidden to enter, the locked door at the end of the hallway. Uncle Jacob had only mentioned the room once, dismissing it as an old study that was of no concern to me. But now, with nothing but the sound of rain and the ticking of the old grandfather clock, curiosity gnawed at me. I listened carefully for the sound of my uncle's snoring before quietly slipping the keys from his coat pocket and making my way down the hall. As I stood before the door, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and guilt. I knew that snooping was wrong, but the urge to uncover the secrets behind that door was too strong to resist. With a deep breath, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in shadows and dust. At first glance, the room seemed unremarkable, filled with worn-out furniture, a writing desk, and moth-eaten curtains that barely filtered the dim light. A shabby rug lay crumpled in the center of the floor, and a nearly empty bookshelf stood against the far wall. But as I approached the bookshelf, my initial disappointment gave way to a growing sense of intrigue. I reached for a book, and as I pulled it from the shelf, dozens of wedding rings tumbled out, clattering onto the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the rings, frozen in place. I half expected Uncle Jacob to burst into the room at any moment, but the house remained eerily silent. Confusion and fear battled within me as I gathered the rings, my hands trembling. Each ring was unique. Some were simple bands, others adorned with diamonds, but all bore the unmistakable marks of age and wear. Who did they belong to? And why were they hidden here? A chilling thought crept into my mind, but I pushed it away, refusing to entertain the dark possibilities that lurked at the edge of my consciousness. But the questions remained, gnawing at me as I carefully placed the rings back into the hollowed-out book. Horrific discovery. Despite the dread building inside me, I couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. I reached for another book on the shelf, my fingers trembling as I opened it. What I found inside made my blood run cold. Nestled within the gouged-out pages were human teeth, far too many to have come from a single person. Some were cracked and yellowed, others still stained with blood. The sight of decaying flesh clinging to the roots made my stomach churn, and I fought the urge to gag. My mind raced with horrifying images of the agony these teeth must have represented. Exposed nerves, shattered molars, bloodied gums. I knew I should have called the police, or at the very least run from the house, but instead, I found myself reaching for yet another book, driven by a morbid compulsion to uncover the truth. This time, the book slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor with a thud. As it hit the ground, a stack of photographs spilled out, scattering across the floorboards. I knelt to gather them, but as I picked up the first one, my breath caught in my throat. The photographs were of people in unimaginable pain. Their faces were twisted in agony, their limbs bound, their mouths taped shut, their eyes wide with terror. The images were seared into my mind, each one more horrifying than the last. In one photo, I recognized the armchair from Uncle Jacob's living room, its leather now cracked and worn. In another, I saw a reflection in a mirror, a face I knew all too well. My own. Before I could fully comprehend the horror before me, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I didn't know what she was doing until after she was already gone. Uncle Jacob's voice, hoarse and broken, shattered the silence. He stood behind me, his eyes fixed on the photographs with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. The truth unveiled. The hours that followed were a blur of police sirens, flashing lights, and the relentless questions of investigators. Uncle Jacob had called the police himself, his voice trembling as he confessed to the horrors hidden within the locked room. The investigation that ensued revealed a nightmare beyond anything I could have imagined. The room was a treasure trove of unspeakable horrors, locks of hair tied with ribbons, watches, jewelry, bloodied scraps of fabric, and even a small tin filled with fingernails. Yet despite extensive searches, no human remains were ever found on the farm. The truth about Aunt Darcy's secret life was more terrifying than any nightmare. No one knew why she had committed these unspeakable acts or what had driven her to such madness. Some of the victims were identified through the photographs, bringing a measure of closure to their grieving families. But others remained unknown, their fates a mystery that would never be solved. Uncle Jacob was questioned repeatedly, but his story never wavered. He claimed he had no knowledge of the murders until after Aunt Darcy's death. He had planned to sell the farm and leave the past behind, but the discovery of her gruesome trophies kept him trapped, fearful that more dark secrets lay hidden within the walls. In the end, Uncle Jacob's health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered a heart attack in his jail cell just weeks after his arrest, and his death brought little comfort to those who sought answers. There was no funeral, and his tombstone was vandalized so many times that it was eventually removed altogether. Haunted by the past. The summer of 1997 was the beginning of a nightmare that haunted me for years to come. I spent the remainder of that summer in therapy, struggling to erase the horrors I had uncovered from my mind. But no matter how hard I tried, the images of that room, the wedding rings, the teeth, the photographs, continued to haunt my dreams. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the imagined screams of Aunt Darcy's victims, my mind trapped in an endless cycle of terror. As time passed, I grew older and tried to move on with my life. Therapy helped, and eventually, I was able to put some distance between myself and the memories of that summer. But even now, as an adult, the shadows of Uncle Jacob's farm still linger in the corners of my mind. I often wonder what drove Aunt Darcy to commit such monstrous acts, but perhaps it's better that some questions remain unanswered, that the full truth of her madness died with her. Yet, on quiet nights, when the world is still and the past feels closer than ever, I find myself thinking back to that dusty, forgotten study and the Brisk, biting evening when I found myself lingering outside the dimly lit Sunrise liquor store with my best friend, Martin. The cold wind whispered through the deserted streets, and the flickering neon sign above cast eerie, shifting shadows on the cracked pavement below. For the past hour, we had been unsuccessfully trying to convince strangers to buy us some beer, each attempt met with a polite refusal or a dismissive shrug. Frustration mingled with the cold, and just as we were about to abandon our mission, a figure emerged from the shadows of the alley behind the store. The man who stepped out was an enigma, a stark contrast to the bleak surroundings. Dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored suit that seemed out of place in our run-down neighborhood, he carried himself with an air of confidence that bordered on unsettling. His hair, golden and perfectly styled, shimmered under the faint glow of the streetlights, catching our attention immediately. A toothpick hung nonchalantly from the corner of his mouth, adding an edge to his already mysterious demeanor. As he approached, I felt a strange mix of intimidation and curiosity, a sense that this man was both a danger and a savior. "Looks like you boys are having some trouble," he remarked, his voice a peculiar blend of gruffness and smoothness, as if two distinct voices were harmonizing in an unsettling duet. I exchanged a wary glance with Martin before responding, unsure of what to make of this stranger. "Yeah, we've hit a bit of a wall. Think you could give us a hand?" The man's lips curled into a smile, revealing teeth that were unnervingly perfect, too white, too straight. "I'd be glad to help," he said, his tone dripping with an unsettling familiarity. "I remember those days when all you wanted was a little fun." "What's your poison?" "Kingfisher," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady despite the unease settling in my stomach. "Good choice," he nodded approvingly. As I fumbled in my pocket to hand him the money, he stopped me with a raised hand, his expression unreadable. "No need. I'll take care of it. You can pay me when I get back, or don't. It's up to you." Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and walked into the store, leaving us standing there in stunned silence. As soon as he disappeared from view, Martin leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something seriously off about that guy. I can't put my finger on it, but he just feels wrong." I nodded in agreement, but there was no turning back now. A few minutes later, the man re-emerged, holding the bottle of beer with a casual ease. He handed it to me, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Thanks, man," I muttered, passing him the cash. The moment his cold fingers brushed against mine, an unsettling chill ran through me. "No problem," he replied, his voice as smooth as ever. "If you ever need anything else, just give me a call." He handed me a small, unassuming card with a phone number scrawled across it. "I'll take care of you." As he walked away, his footsteps echoed ominously in the empty street. Martin shivered beside me, muttering under his breath, "That guy is seriously messed up." I shrugged, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. Little did I know, this encounter was the start of a nightmare that would soon consume my life. The temptation of a dangerous deal. A week later, curiosity and the allure of easy money got the better of me. The idea of becoming the go-to supplier of booze for my school was too tempting to resist. I found myself staring at the card the man had given me, my fingers hovering over the phone. With a deep breath, I texted the number, half expecting no response. To my surprise, a reply came almost instantly, asking me to meet him at the same liquor store in 2 days. Day arrived. I stood nervously outside the store, the chill in the air doing little to calm my nerves. Just as doubt began to creep in, I saw him approaching from the alley once more. This time, he was dressed casually in a red t-shirt and jeans, yet something about him still felt wrong. The unease I had felt before was back, stronger than ever. "Ready for your fake ID?" he asked, his voice as unsettling as I remembered. I nodded, my heart pounding. He handed me the ID, and I could hardly believe my eyes. It was perfect. Better than anything I could have imagined. The name, Franco Millard, was printed above an address that matched my hometown exactly. The holograms, the security features, it all looked disturbingly authentic. "Take a good look," the man said, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "If you're satisfied, we can finalize our deal." I inspected the ID, marveling at its perfection. Everything seemed flawless. As I reached into my pocket to pay him, his hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "One more thing," he said, his grip tightening painfully. "Your phone." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to run, but something in his gaze held me in place. Reluctantly, I handed him my phone. He quickly typed something into it before returning it to me, his expression unreadable. "Enjoy your new life, kid," he said with a grin that sent a shiver down my spine. "And remember, if you or your friends ever need anything else, you know who to call." With that, he turned and melted into the shadows of the alley, leaving me standing there, my mind racing with a mix of excitement and dread. The nightmare begins. That evening, eager to show off my new ID, I headed to Martin's house. As I turned onto his street, I noticed his mom's car parked outside, a rare sight. Shrugging it off, I walked up to the front door and let myself in with the spare key they had given me. "Hey, Mrs. Smith, it's just me," I called out as I stepped into the kitchen. But instead of the usual warm greeting, she spun around, her face contorted in fear. "Oh my God, please don't hurt me. Take whatever you want," she screamed, her voice trembling with terror. "What?" "Mrs. Smith, it's me, James," I stammered, completely bewildered. But she didn't seem to recognize me. Her eyes were wide with panic as she groped for something on the counter. Before I could react, she had grabbed a knife, holding it out with trembling hands. "Get out. I'll call the police. I'll kill you if you come any closer," she shrieked, surged through me as I dropped the beer and backed away, stumbling out of the house. I fumbled for my phone and frantically called Martin. "Martin, your mom just lost it." She threatened me with a knife and kicked me out. I blurted, my voice shaking. There was a long, ominous pause on the other end of the line before Martin finally spoke. "Who the hell are you? What do you mean, my mom kicked you out?" "It's me, James. Your best friend. What's going on?" "James? I don't know any James." "Stop messing with me, you psycho." Martin snapped before abruptly hanging up. I stood there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. What in the world was happening? A horrifying revelation. Still reeling from the encounter, I hurried home, hoping the familiar surroundings would help me make sense of the madness. But the moment I stepped through the door, a wave of nausea washed over me. Something was terribly wrong. I headed to my room, desperate to clear my head. But when I opened the door, I froze in horror. Standing in the middle of my room was a boy who looked exactly like me. The only difference was the toothpick hanging lazily from his mouth, just like the man from the liquor store. He turned to face me, a sinister smile spreading across his lips. "Hey there, kid," he drawled, his voice a chilling echo of the man's. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. This was impossible. How could this boy be me? Before I could react, the boy's grin widened, and without warning, he slammed his forehead against the doorframe. Blood poured from the wound as he collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. "Dad! Dad! Help me!" he screamed, his voice a twisted, agonizing mimicry of my own. Within moments, I heard the heavy footsteps of my father rushing down the hallway. He skidded to a stop in the doorway, his face a mask of horror as he took in the scene. "Dad, it's me!" I cried, but the words stuck in my throat as my father's expression twisted with fury. You sick bastard!" he roared, charging at me with a rage I had never seen before. The next few moments were a blur of pain and terror as he beat me mercilessly, his fists fueled by anger and disbelief. I tried to explain, to tell him the truth, but the words wouldn't come. The man with the golden hair. The trial was a formality. The verdict was predetermined. They sentenced me to prison for a crime I didn't commit, a crime that the real me, the boy I had seen in my room, had never committed. As I was led away in chains, I caught sight of the man with the golden hair, standing in the back of the courtroom. He gave me a small wave, that same twisted smile playing on his lips, before he turned and disappeared from view. A concept so familiar to us often fails to evoke the true fear it deserves. In today's world, the inevitability of death is treated almost casually, discussed with detachment, sometimes even humor. But when we were young, the thought of ceasing to exist was a source of profound dread. The idea of slipping into an eternal void, never to feel, see, or experience anything again, was overwhelming. Death was more than the end of life. It was the loss of everything that made us who we are, our emotions, our consciousness, our very essence. For most, this contemplation remains a distant fear, something to be grappled with later in life. But for one man, this fear became a harsh, terrifying reality. His encounter with death wasn't a gradual acceptance, it was thrust upon him in a moment of sheer horror. It began with a motorbike accident, an event so sudden and violent that it shattered not just his body, but his perception of life and death as well. The experiment. The aftermath of the crash was a blur of sounds and sensations, a cacophony of emergency room chaos, the incessant beeping of machines, the sterile smell of antiseptic. When he finally regained consciousness, he found himself in a hospital room, the sign above the door reading, Whitefield Hospital, Emergency Operating Theater. Relief washed over him. He was alive. But that relief quickly turned to confusion as he took in the tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. He was not out of danger yet. A surgeon soon entered, bringing with him a revelation that would shatter any remaining sense of normalcy. The doctor calmly informed him that he had been part of a groundbreaking experiment, the world's first partial brain transplant. "You now have about 5 ounces of another person's brain in you," the surgeon explained. The man's shock was palpable. This was no ordinary surgery. It was an experimental breakthrough, one that had saved his life, but at what cost? The brain donor, as the surgeon explained, had been a young man who had tragically died of a heart attack. His brain, preserved and shipped for this pioneering surgery, had become the key to saving our protagonist's life. Yet, this miraculous operation carried with it a chilling undertone, one that was hinted at but not fully explained. A note from the lead researcher, Mr. S., congratulated him on being the first recipient of this revolutionary procedure. But the note, though seemingly celebratory, had a cryptic, almost patronizing tone, as if it hinted at something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. The unraveling. For a year, life seemed to return to some semblance of normalcy. The man resumed his daily routines, the memory of the surgery gradually fading into the background. But then, the oddities began, small at first, but growing increasingly bizarre. He started noticing strange lapses in his mind, words that didn't belong appearing in his thoughts, emails, and notes. The word, twisting, began to surface repeatedly, almost as if it had a life of its own. What started as a minor curiosity quickly spiraled into a disturbing obsession. As the days passed, this single word began to dominate his life. He found himself compulsively twisting objects, paper rolls, banana peels, anything he could get his hands on. His apartment became a chaotic mess, littered with twisted items that bore the marks of his obsession. The compulsion grew so intense that he even injured himself in the process, his mind unable to resist the overpowering urge. Desperate for answers, he sought help from a psychiatrist. But rather than alleviating his torment, her advice to embrace his impulses only deepened his descent into madness. The word, twisting, consumed him, seeping into every aspect of his life, until it became impossible to tell where his mind ended and the obsession began. The Devil's Mark. One morning, he awoke to a sight so horrifying that it shook him to his core. His apartment walls were covered in writing, thousands of scrawled words, all saying the same thing: twisting. The red and black markers had transformed his home into a nightmarish landscape, every surface bearing the mark of his obsession. But amidst the chaos, one message stood out, chilling him to the bone: "The devil is inside you, James." The handwriting was jagged and unfamiliar, as if written by a hand not his own. Yet, there was no denying that the message was meant for him. The name, Mr. S., was scrawled prominently, a sinister reminder of the man who had performed the surgery that saved his life. It was as if the message was warning him, telling him that the real threat was not his obsession, but something far darker that had taken root within him. His life, once ordinary, had now become a relentless nightmare. Everywhere he turned, he was haunted by disturbing visions, flashes of a grotesque, devilish face that appeared in the most unexpected places. The figure was terrifying, bald, with red horns, bulging eyes, and a skeletal grin that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was coming for him. The climax of his terror came one night when his apartment erupted in flames. The fire spread quickly, consuming everything in its path. His girlfriend, unaware of the danger, was caught in the blaze. In a horrific scene of blood and fire, the demonic face appeared, attacking her with unimaginable ferocity. He watched in helpless horror as the creature gruesomely bit off her head, leaving him to flee in desperation as the flames devoured everything he held dear. In his panic, he took refuge in a wardrobe, but there was no escape from the terror that hunted him. The devilish whispers grew louder, and he could feel a malevolent presence drawing closer, suffocating him with its sheer evil. His sanity teetered on the brink as he struggled to comprehend the nightmarish reality that had ensnared him. The final revelation. Determined to uncover the truth, he set up a camera to film himself sleeping. What he discovered on the tape was beyond comprehension. As he lay there, seemingly peaceful, his head twisted 180 degrees to face the camera. His eyes were black voids, and a demonic smile stretched across his face as he emitted chilling, guttural sounds. The footage was a horrifying revelation. The brain transplant had not just saved his life. It had unlocked a malevolent force within him, a connection to otherworldly horrors that had plagued his existence. The distorted image on the camera screen was undeniable proof that something far more sinister than a medical miracle had taken place. The brain he had received was not just a piece of another person. It was a gateway to a dark, terrifying realm that now had a hold on him. The descent into madness. Realizing the brain's dark influence on his psyche, he sought to reverse the damage, to rid himself of the evil that had taken root in his mind. But it was too late. The experiment had already twisted his reality beyond repair. His mind became a battleground of nightmares and twisted visions, his sanity slipping further with each passing day. The man who had once been an ordinary accident survivor was now a victim of a nightmarish experiment gone horribly wrong. His journey serves as a chilling reminder of the unpredictable consequences of tampering with the unknown. In the end, the experiment that had saved his life had also damned him, leaving him trapped in a world where reality and nightmare were indistinguishable.